We know that most cases of breast cancer are caused by somatic mutations, which are not hereditary. In these cases, cells in the breast become mutated over a person's life, causing cell division to become unregulated and form a tumor. However, in some cases, people can be born with germline mutations which are hereditary, and we will be focusing on one such mutation today, a mutated BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene. This trait is present in 1 out of 300 to 800 people according to the National Library of Medicine's data. The proteins altered by mutations in these genes work on tumor suppression and DNA repair. Individuals with these mutations are automatically at some risk for developing breast cancer, so there are now tests to detect these traits.
23andMe tests 44 variations out of 4,000 variants of the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene that are associated with cancer risk. C8904 is a deletion in the BRCA2 gene that causes the BRCA2 gene to express improperly. Since BRCA2 codes for BRCA proteins that are tumor suppressors, the deletion causes the protein produced to not suppress tumors properly. These proteins are in all cells of the body, but most notably affect tissues in the breast. The risk of getting breast cancer does not increase significantly with this gene, but this mutation can greatly increase the risk of getting breast cancer if compounded with other mutations. The variations that 23andMe tests all have similar effects on the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, as they could cause the gene to no longer be able to produce the tumor-suppressing proteins. The greatest limitation of the 23andMe test is that it does not test all the known mutations in the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes. There are over 4,000 variants of the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes that increase breast cancer, and 23andMe only tests for 44. 23andMe also doesn't test for any mutations in other genes that are associated with breast cancer risk. Though they are the most notable, BRCA1 and BRCA2 are not the only genes that increase breast cancer risk, so other genes should be tested in addition to BRCA1 and BRCA2.
For our SNP chip test, we will include thousands of genetic variations. This comprehensive approach will allow us to capture a wider array of risk factors associated with breast cancer, comparing to limited tests like those offered by 23andMe. One important genetic variation we'll include on our SNP chip is RS1042522 and the TP53 gene. TP53 produces the P53 protein, a tumor suppressor that maintains genomic stability. The P53 protein helps prevent harmful mutations by repairing DNA, controlling cell division, and initiating cell death if damage is beyond repair. When mutated, it can no longer control cell growth, effectively leading to cancer. TP53 mutations are some of the most common genetic changes in cancer, including breast cancer, occurring in 15% to 71% of cases. The RS1042522 SNP affects how well P53 binds to DNA and activates genes needed for DNA repair. People with certain versions of the SNP may have a reduced ability to fix DNA damage, making them more likely to develop cancer. Our test offers several advantages over 23andMe's test. While 23andMe only analyzes 44 of BRCA1 and BRCA2 variants, our SNP test will cover thousands of variants. Genes like TP53, which have been associated with cancer. By incorporating SNPs such as RS1042522, we provide a more holistic assessment of an individual's genetic risk for breast cancer. While the impact of RS1042522 SNP on breast cancer is relatively small on its own, it is part of the broader set of genetic predispositions that collectively can provide a more accurate risk profile. Base risk estimates for breast cancer vary depending on multiple factors such as family history, lifestyle, and genetic background. Variants like RS1042522 can modify this base risk. For example, while having a single SNP may only slightly increase risk, the effect of multiple genetic variations can slightly alter an individual's overall risk profile. Ultimately, our test will provide a more precise assessment of genetic predisposition.
One major limitation of our genetic test is that the SNPs being tested for are far from the only causes of breast cancer. Many people without any hereditary genetic mutations are still at risk for breast cancer, and the mutations themselves only increase one's risk of developing breast cancer by a very small amount. Thus, the results from this test cannot certainly determine whether one will or will not develop breast cancer, only whether they are at additional risk. Another thing to note is that the SNPs in the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes that our test looks for do not greatly increase one's actual risk on their own. According to SNPedia data, it is only really worth noting if an individual has a number of SNPs from the list of possible variants known to increase one's risk of breast cancer.
Genetic testing for breast cancer may not be entirely beneficial. If someone tests positive for traits associated with breast cancer, it could cause people who are not actually going to develop breast cancer to undergo unnecessary procedures. Genetic testing itself can already be fairly expensive, but the additional cost of preventative treatments can be very high. This can cause major financial strain on the individual and their families to have these preventative treatments done. This strain can also contribute to emotional stress of the individual or their family as they are trying to save enough money for these treatments. Also, preventative treatments can be fairly invasive, which can put physical stress on the body and cause additional emotional stress on the individual or the individual's family. Another group to consider are those who have genetic testing done, test positive, and then realize they cannot afford preventative treatment. If someone is going to eventually develop breast cancer and they are unable to afford treatment, they will just have to bear the emotional burden of waiting for cancer to develop. For those who do not develop the cancer, it could cause unnecessary anxiety in the individual that they would not have had if they did not have the genetic testing done. Also, genetic testing overall could raise concerns about privacy. There have been concerns raised about companies that perform genetic testing selling the data collected from genetic tests to other companies or the government. Though companies like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA deny selling data, they may still have to release data to the government in accordance with the law. For those that have concerns about their data privacy, it may be worth foregoing genetic testing, especially if there is not a likely risk of developing breast cancer.